This is Chanel Bunger with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast, and today I'm delighted to speak with Matt Hartzman, who joins the podcast to discuss his background, trends he's watching in cybersecurity, and a bit more. Matt, thank you so much for joining me. Could you take a moment to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background and career?
Sure. Thanks for having me on the podcast. It's an honor. I've spent the last 20 years at the intersection of healthcare and technology. As a chief information officer, I spent the last 7+ years with a keen focus on risk management and cybersecurity. So for organizations that have challenges in these areas, I help them effectively acquire, develop, leverage, and maintain technology to do three things. One is make and save money. Everybody likes that. Two is improve quality, clients, patients, and the brands like that. And three is to lower risk, or at least understand the risk you're comfortable accepting. It's your CEO, CFO, board, investors, et cetera, that like this one. And I have a really good track record of doing all three of these things. But what I really, really enjoy is providing these values while I develop tomorrow's leaders.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that introduction. Now, moving forward, could you tell us a few of the trends that you're watching in the cybersecurity and technology space?
I'd say there's two primary that I'd like to mention. One is there's, I think, an overspending in cybersecurity right now. And people might laugh at that given the headlines. But I think it's overspending without lowering risk. So, of course, every organization needs to have basic hygiene. They need to be investing in security. But where most of the incremental effort and money ought to be going is resilience. Meaning, can you prove to your organization on a regular basis that when something bad happens, you can recover and get your business back up quickly running, whether it's a hospital, an accounting firm, or manufacturing company. It's important in all businesses. And also the board and the executives have accountability for this, and I think it starts with education. So the old advice that board members needed to know the right questions to ask, I don't think is good enough. I think they need to know questions to ask and what good answers are. So security compliance. So there's many organizations that are trying to do security-driven compliance versus what some organizations may be doing. It's compliance-driven security. And let me just explain the difference. If an organization wants to get a certain certification, they invest time, money, resources to get certified or accredited or compliant. That not necessarily makes them more secure. So I really think every organization ought to be striving for security-driven compliance and minimize the work you're doing for compliance so that you still have to check the box. You still need to make sure you are compliant, but minimize that work. And if you're doing what's right by security for your organization, your appetite, then I think compliance should be a minimal effort. So that's one, is around the whole overspending and accountability around cybersecurity. Two, I think there's a level of naivete from leadership, especially around the organizational use of artificial intelligence, specifically generative AI, or many people just refer to the brand ChatGPT, but there's many versions of ChatGPT out there. So every organization, there's employees in every organization, I'm convinced, that are already using AI. But what organizations might be a little naive to today is the risks of IP leakage, meaning as people put in prompts into a ChatGPT, whatever data they associate with their prompt or their request actually is no longer their IP. If nothing's done. And privacy sanctions. So like if an organization is sharing privacy information just to get some analysis done, in the healthcare world, that violates HIPAA. So I think there's a lot of education. There's definitely controls and awareness that can be put in place. For example, let's say a software developer says, ChatGPT, can you help me optimize this code I've been developing or refactor? ChatGPT comes back rather quickly with a pretty effective code, but all of a sudden that code is no longer that vendor's code, kind of in the public domain, or at least only by the ChatGPT sponsor. Or if a child welfare caseworker says, here's 100 cases, can you make sure all the required safety checks have been made? ChatGPT will respond rather quickly and point out the ones that haven't been, the safety checks that have not been made, but all of a sudden you violated HIPAA. So I think there's a naivete that might not be getting the headlines today because there's so much ransomware capturing all that oxygen in the headlines. But I think that's something that will actually a trend that will need to get addressed.
Absolutely. And moving forward more into the second half of 2024, what are you most focused on and excited about?
I think I'm most excited about the opportunity side of AI. I talked a little bit about the risk side, but I think AI is all about helping people focus on critical and creative thinking, what AI doesn't do. So that's one, is definitely the opportunity of AI. Probably me and tens of millions of my closest friends are all focused on the opportunity of AI. I think it's very nuanced given the business somebody is in and how it can happen. I think a second one is through the eyes of venture firms and sometimes PE firms that I talk to periodically, I get to see some pretty cool new innovations. For example, I recently heard that there's a first FDA-approved DNA test to determine a person's proclivity to become addicted to opioids. And I think about how much of a game changer this will be, how many lives could be impacted in a positive way before surgery. The surgeon or the doctors know somebody's proclivity to addiction to that particular drug that was being given. So that huge value potential. And then if you fast forward and think about the potential liabilities if the test wasn't perfect and where addiction could have been avoided, I think hospital systems and doctors will look at the liability side of that as well.
Got it. And now that we've covered the future, looking back a bit, what are you most proud of from the last 6 to 18 months?
I think from the last 16 to 18 months, I'd say establishing a security practice from scratch for a company that builds systems for governments that help serve the most vulnerable. So think Medicaid, food stamps, child welfare, those types of government systems. So starting with no security program whatsoever, when I had finished building the program, the organization was hosting 50 plus government systems because there was a robust enough practical security program and the necessary compliance programs go along with it. I think it helps an awful lot of people.
Absolutely. And with your 20 plus years of experience at the intersection of healthcare and technology, what advice would you give to emerging leaders looking to have the same type of career as you?
That's interesting. So I have 4 children from the age of 25 to 33. And I'd say the advice I give them all the time, which I would give to any and all evolving leaders, is to stay curious. You can't stay on top of everything. So you've got to be a little picky on what you do stay on top of and what you stay curious about, but you do have to pick something or some things. And then you surround yourself with others that can provide complete coverage of the organizational priorities today and tomorrow in the future. So I would put stay curious on the top of my advice for evolving leaders.
Excellent advice. Well, Matt, I want to thank you for your time today. But before I let you go, is there anything else that listeners should know?
I guess one more thing I'd mention is I am currently looking for my next permanent position where I can help organizations with their cybersecurity, risk management, technology, bringing an increasingly important perspective to the leadership team that combines all 3 of those. But I really appreciate your time. This was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, Matt, I want to thank you once again for sharing your insights with us today and for joining me on the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. Thank you.
Okay, take care.